In 1965, Singapore was forcibly expelled from Malaysia, leaving it a tiny swampy island with a GDP per capita of just $500. No water, no oil, no hinterland. How do you build a wealthy nation when you literally have nothing to sell? On August 9, 1965, Singapore became an independent republic under the leadership of Lee Kuan Yew. The island faced massive unemployment, soaring above 10%, and a bleak future with the British military withdrawal threatening to wipe out jobs. The open loop was clear: how to attract global money when you have nothing to offer. The geography was brutal: a malaria-infested swamp at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, with no natural resources to rely on. Zero oil, no land for agriculture. The British military withdrawal was looming, threatening to wipe out a quarter of the island's jobs overnight. The island's survival depended entirely on strategic decisions. Lee Kuan Yew wept on national television when announcing the separation. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a multiracial island surrounded by larger, hostile neighbors. The odds of survival were mathematically zero, but this desperate beginning would force an unprecedented economic experiment. Yet from this despair emerged a fierce determination. The world watched with skepticism. Today, Singapore boasts a staggering trade-to-GDP ratio of over 300%. But back then, they had to invent an economy out of thin air. The question wasn't just how to survive, but how to become indispensable to the world's most powerful traders. This required a radical shift in mindset. If you have no resources, what exactly is your product? You have to sell something invisible. How do you package trust, stability, and efficiency, and sell it to multinational corporations who have the entire world to choose from for their factories? This was the core challenge that Singapore faced. Their answer would redefine the concept of national wealth. Lee Kuan Yew's answer would change the definition of wealth forever. Singapore weaponized its lack of resources. It built the ultimate global hub of trust, trade, and state-backed capitalism. They realized that being a barren swamp meant they had nothing to lose. Every disadvantage became a driver for innovation. This mindset allowed them to take risks others avoided. The strategy relied on intermediary trade and refining raw goods for re-export. They leveraged their strategic port to become the busiest transshipment hub on Earth. They didn't have oil, but they built massive refineries to process other nations' crude, capturing immense value. This created a new economic model based on service and processing. To attract foreign direct investment, Singapore needed an attractive investment climate and absolute political stability. While neighboring countries nationalized foreign assets, Singapore rolled out the red carpet. They offered tax incentives, built industrial estates, and guaranteed that foreign capital would be fiercely protected. This approach was radical for its time. They enforced the rule of law with an iron fist, eventually becoming the third least corrupt country globally. This wasn't just policy, it was survival. If a single multinational corporation felt cheated, the entire national experiment would collapse. Trust was their only natural resource. Every transaction was monitored to ensure fairness. To control this massive economic engine, the government created Temasek Holdings. This sovereign wealth fund managed state assets, holding billions in key industries. Government-linked corporations accounted for a massive chunk of the stock exchange, blending state control with ruthless capitalist efficiency. Temasek became a model for state capitalism worldwide. The transformation was unprecedented. By the 1990s, Singapore had vaulted from a developing swamp to having the highest per capita GDP in Asia. It ranked among the top nations on the UN Human Development Index. The impossible math had been solved. Singapore had proven that resourcefulness trumps resources. But how exactly did a barren island convince the world's biggest corporations to trust it over established global powers? The answer lies in a terrifyingly efficient system of state capitalism. A system that would turn a desperate swamp into the richest country on Earth. This system combined strict discipline with unparalleled incentive. In 1965, Singapore's GDP per capita was a mere $500. They had no oil, no gold, and no agriculture. But they had the Strait of Malacca. The government weaponized this single geographic asset to pioneer a strategy known as entrepot trade. This strategy turned their location into a competitive advantage. Entrepot trade meant importing raw goods, refining them, and re-exporting them at a profit. It was a massive gamble. Why would global shipping companies choose a tiny, unstable island over established regional ports? The answer lay in ruthless efficiency and political stability. Singapore promised faster turnaround times and zero corruption. The state aggressively expanded the port of Singapore. Dredging teams worked around the clock to deepen the harbors for massive cargo ships. They built state-of-the-art container terminals before their competitors even realized the future of global shipping had arrived. That gamble paid off beyond imagination. Today, the Port of Singapore stands as the busiest transshipment port on Earth, processing a staggering volume of cargo containers every year. It evolved into the pulsing heart of Asian maritime trade, seamlessly connecting Eastern production to Western demand. The numbers are staggering. By 2020, Singapore's trade-to-GDP ratio reached an astonishing 320%. This wasn't just an economy. It was a giant, hyper-efficient toll booth on the world's most vital maritime highway, generating wealth from the movement of others. But simply having a port wasn't enough. Singapore urgently needed foreign capital. So they opened their doors to massive foreign direct investment by crafting a hyper-pro-business environment. Do you think a country should prioritize foreign corporations or local businesses first? Tell us below. To attract multinational corporations, Singapore eliminated red tape. They offered tax holidays, guaranteed property rights, and enforced strict anti-corruption laws. Thus, foreign investors suddenly found a safe, predictable haven in a region otherwise plagued by political instability and nationalization risks. The strategy paid off handsomely. Singapore consistently ranked first globally in the ease of doing business. Multinational corporations flocked to the island, bringing billions in capital, cutting-edge technology, and desperately needed jobs for a rapidly growing, unemployed local population. Global giants like Shell, Texas Instruments, and Hewlett-Packard set up massive operations. They were no longer just trading goods. They were manufacturing high-value electronics and refining oil. Singapore was no longer a swamp. It had become an industrial powerhouse. Yet, a critical problem remained. The bustling port and early factories only generated low-wage manual labor jobs. Dock workers and assembly line operators could barely survive on their meager salaries. The nation was generating GDP, but the average citizen remained trapped in poverty. The leadership quickly realized that relying on cheap labor was a trap. Surrounding countries had larger populations and could always undercut Singaporean wages. If they stayed on this path, the nation would eventually lose its competitive edge and face economic collapse. How do you force a rapid economic upgrade when you have no domestic market and no natural resources? This was a terrifying dilemma. The solution required a level of state intervention that would terrify traditional Western economists, yet it was the only path forward. Therefore, foreign money began flowing in rapidly. But a port alone only generates low-wage manual labor jobs. To become truly rich, Singapore needed to attempt something no other developing nation dared to try. The stakes were existential. demanding a bold, unprecedented strategy. In 1965, Singapore faced a brutal reality. With a GDP per capita of just $500, the government had to act fast. They didn't nationalize industries. Instead, they stepped in as a venture capitalist, taking strategic stakes to build state-backed enterprises. This bold strategy gave birth to government-linked corporations, known as GLCs. By 2011, the top 6 GLCs accounted for 17% of Singapore's total market capitalization. The state wasn't just a regulator, it was the ultimate corporate shareholder, directing national wealth. To manage this massive portfolio, they created Temasek Holdings in 1974. This sovereign wealth fund controlled state assets, holding $69 billion by 2014. It was a masterstroke of state capitalism, turning public administration into a highly profitable, globally competitive enterprise. But how does a nation without raw materials manufacture wealth? Singapore weaponized its geography to move up the value chain. Instead of extracting resources, it refined raw goods for re-export, transforming imported crude oil into premium fuel and sand into microchips. By the 1990s, Singapore pioneered wafer fabrication, dominating the global semiconductor market. This relentless focus on high-tech refining pushed their trade to GDP ratio to an astonishing 320%. You think this state-led capitalism is a model other nations should copy? Tell us below. Yet, this glittering success masked a growing vulnerability. The economic engine, therefore, relied heavily on an endless supply of cheap foreign labor. Millions of migrant workers powered the factories and construction sites, keeping wages artificially low and profits artificially high for the state. Critics soon began to attack the system. They argued that the powerful GLCs distorted free market competition, crowding out local entrepreneurs. Therefore, the state was both the referee and the star player, making it nearly impossible for independent businesses to thrive and compete. The government defended the model, claiming GLCs were necessary to anchor strategic industries during turbulent times. They insisted that without state intervention, Singapore would have remained a vulnerable swamp. Consequently, the debate over market fairness and labor exploitation only intensified as the wealth poured in. By 2021, Singapore boasted the highest per capita GDP on Earth, surpassing global superpowers. It was a staggering transformation from a resourceless island to a financial titan. But therefore, the underlying cracks in the foundation, hidden behind the glittering skyline, were beginning to widen. The reliance on foreign labor and state monopolies created a fragile imbalance. Consequently, the system demanded constant global trade to survive. If the world stopped trading, Singapore would starve. The ultimate global hub of trust was built on shifting sands, not solid rock. But as the state's wealth grew, so did the criticism. Therefore, was this model a fragile fluke built on cheap foreign labor, or was it a sustainable economic miracle? The answer would determine if the island nation could survive the coming global storms. The gamble paid off. By the 1990s, that desperate swamp had transformed into a high-income economy, ranking 9th on the United Nations Human Development Index. But raw numbers only tell half the story. How did an island without a single natural resource sustain such explosive growth? The answer lies in a staggering statistic. In 2020, Singapore achieved a mind-bending trade to GDP ratio of 320%. This wasn't just trade. It was a hyper-accelerated engine of intermediary commerce, refining raw goods and re-exporting them globally. Could any other port replicate this logistical miracle? The port of Singapore became the busiest transshipment hub on the planet. Millions of containers crossed its docks daily, proving that geography could be weaponized. But what good is a bustling port if investors don't trust the system handling their money? Trust was the ultimate currency. Singapore didn't just build ports, it built an ironclad reputation. By 2021, it ranked as the third least corrupt country globally. While neighboring nations bled wealth to bribery, Singapore enforced ruthless transparency. If you want to understand how nations truly enrich themselves, subscribe to our Economic History channel. This unwavering stability triggered massive inflows of foreign direct investment. Multinational corporations flooded in, seeking a safe haven in Asia. Simultaneously, government-linked corporations, backed by sovereign wealth funds like Temasek, controlled major stakes. The state wasn't just a regulator. It was a ruthless, profit-driven market player. Yet, state dominance didn't crush the free market. Singapore consistently ranked first globally in ease of doing business. Red tape was slashed, taxes were kept low, and contracts were sacred. How did a heavily state-influenced economy become the ultimate capitalist paradox? The paradox is the point. The results were staggering. Singapore reached the highest per capita GDP in the world, measured by purchasing power parity, surpassing $100,000. From a destitute island earning $500 per person in 1965, it had overtaken global superpowers. The enigma was finally solved. Wealth wasn't hoarded at the top. The state aggressively invested in housing and education, turning its population into its most valuable asset. Citizens enjoyed world-class infrastructure and health care. The UN recognized this, placing Singapore 9th on the Human Development Index. The swamp had built a first-world society. It had no oil, it had no gold, it had no arable land. Yet it weaponized its absolute lack of resources to build an unbreakable fortress of trust and trade. The swamp had become the richest country on Earth. But a lingering question remains. Is this model transferable? Therefore, the miracle was complete, proving that a resourceless island could become the richest nation on Earth. The Singaporean playbook is entirely public. Every policy, every law, and every economic strategy is documented for the world to study and replicate. But reality is far more complicated. If Singapore's playbook is so public, why haven't other resource-poor nations copied it successfully? The answer reveals a dark truth about global economics. It requires sacrifices that most democracies simply cannot endure. What hidden cost did Singapore pay for this unprecedented prosperity? The truth is unsettling. Singapore's story proves that having nothing is the greatest competitive advantage of all. But can other nations simply copy this blueprint? The brutal truth is that Singapore's unique geopolitical circumstances make this model nearly impossible to replicate elsewhere. You cannot manufacture a strategic location at the crossroads of global trade routes. You also cannot artificially create the existential fear of a tiny island surrounded by larger neighbors. That desperation forced a ruthless efficiency that few nations will ever experience. Yet, this perfection comes with a heavy price. The engine of this economy relies heavily on a massive influx of foreign labor. Today, non-resident workers make up a significant portion of the population, creating deep social tensions beneath the glittering skyline. Does a society truly prosper if its growth depends on a transient workforce that never fully belongs? This reliance on immigration policies constantly tests the delicate balance between economic expansion and national identity, leaving citizens questioning their place. And there is another vulnerability hiding in plain sight. With a staggering trade-to-GDP ratio of over 300%, Singapore is entirely dependent on the smooth flow of global commerce. When the world sneezes, this island catches pneumonia. The state-backed capitalism model, driven by giants like Temasek Holdings, also concentrates immense power. While it guarantees rapid execution and stability, it leaves little room for the chaotic, unpredictable innovation that often disrupts industries in other parts of the world. Despite these cracks, the impact of Singapore's model is undeniable. The absence of resources did not just force survival, it forged the ultimate global hub of trust. From a swamp with a $500 GDP, they built an empire. Today, Singapore boasts one of the highest per capita GDPs on the planet, exceeding $100,000. It transformed from a developing nation into a global financial powerhouse in a single generation, proving that ruthless efficiency can conquer geographic destiny. The lesson here is profound. When a nation has no oil, no gold, and no hinterland, it must invest in its people and institutions. It must become the safest, most reliable place for global capital to anchor. But what happens when the next global crisis threatens the very trade routes that built this empire? As superpowers clash and supply chains fracture, can this delicate masterpiece of statecraft survive the turbulent storms of the 21st century? That is a story for another video. If you want to understand how nations build wealth from nothing and how fragile these empires can be, make sure to subscribe and watch our next deep dive into global trade.